Ladies and gentlemen, over the past few hours, the world has continued to witness a rapid chain of dramatic developments, from the battlefield in Ukraine and Russia's increasingly tough posture, to the escalating tensions in the Middle East, where the Strait of Hormuz has once again become a critical choke point capable of shaking global energy markets. In today's program on Life and Current Affairs, we will take a closer look at the most important developments. Ukraine has imposed new sanctions targeting Russia's missile supply chain. A Russian vessel sank mysteriously off the coast of Spain, raising questions about possible links to nuclear technology. Russian media have circulated claims that a Su-57 fighter jet shot down an early warning aircraft supplied to Ukraine by the West, and at the same time, President Vladimir Putin has issued a hardline statement about the new phase of confrontation with the West. Beyond the war in Eastern Europe, the Middle East is also entering an extremely sensitive moment. Iran is accused of coming under attacks targeting its refinery infrastructure, while the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia are said to have taken limited military measures. The United States continues to tighten its position toward Tehran, while China, Iraq, Pakistan, and South Korea are all being drawn into the maritime security equation surrounding the Strait of Hormuz. And now, ladies and gentlemen, please join us for this special international roundup from Life and Current Affairs. First, the main focus is Ukraine's latest move aimed directly at Russia's ability to produce weapons. According to Reuters and Ukrainian outlets such as Babel and Ukrainska Pravda, President Volodymyr Zelensky has signed new sanctions decrees targeting individuals, companies, and networks accused of supporting Russia's military-industrial complex. The stated goal is to disrupt the supply chains of components, technology, missile fuel, and military equipment that Russia uses to sustain its military campaign in Ukraine. What is particularly notable is that these measures do not only target companies directly involved in arms production. They also extend to entities accused of helping Russia evade international sanctions. According to Babel, the list includes companies connected to components for the S-300 and S-400 air defense systems, Topol, Yars, and Iskander ballistic missiles, as well as producers of gunpowder, missile fuel, ammunition components, radio reconnaissance equipment, and specialized aircraft. Strategically, this is not merely a symbolic sanctions move. Ukraine is trying to shift part of the war from the front line to Russia's industrial rear. If missiles, drones, and ammunition are the tools that create direct pressure on the battlefield, then electronic components, high-precision equipment, and financial networks are the lifeblood that keeps the war machine running. That is why every new sanctions decision is viewed by Kyiv as another way to gradually cut into Moscow's ability to regenerate its military power. At the same time, the European Union is also said to be discussing new sanctions measures against Russia, focusing on its defense industry and the so-called Shadow Fleet, a network of transport vessels accused by the West of helping Russia evade export controls and oil price caps. If these measures are approved, pressure on Russia's logistical routes could continue to rise in the coming period. From the sanctions front, we now turn to a story that has raised many questions: the explosion and sinking of a Russian vessel off the coast of Spain. According to AP, the Russian cargo ship Ursa Major sank in the Mediterranean in December 2024 after an explosion in the engine room. AP cited information from Spanish authorities saying that the ship's captain claimed the vessel may have been carrying nuclear reactor components similar to those used on submarines, but not nuclear fuel. If these suspicions are confirmed, this would be far more than an ordinary maritime accident. A Russian ship taking an unusual route, carrying sensitive cargo, and sinking under mysterious circumstances near Europe is certain to attract the attention of Western intelligence agencies. Details surrounding the route, the cargo, and the reactions of the parties after the sinking have made the case even more difficult to interpret. Geopolitically, if the ship was indeed linked to nuclear technology and if North Korea was mentioned as a possible destination by some international media outlets, then this story is no longer only about Russia and Ukraine. It could touch the strategic triangle of Russia, North Korea, and the West, where any sign of sensitive technology transfer could further escalate global security tensions. Next is a claim currently circulating in Russian media and among several military sources. Russia's Su-57 stealth fighter is said to have shot down a Saab 340 early warning aircraft supplied by Sweden to Ukraine, according to several military websites and media outlets citing Russian sources. The claim has attracted attention, but there has not yet been official confirmation from independent parties. Therefore, it must be presented with caution. An early warning aircraft is not simply an aircraft carrying radar. It functions almost like an airborne command center, capable of surveillance, detecting low-flying targets, supporting Air Force coordination, and linking missile strikes. For Ukraine, such platforms are especially important in upgrading its combat capabilities to Western standards. If an early warning aircraft was shot down, the loss would not only be material, the greater damage would lie in the gap it creates in surveillance, coordination, and airborne early warning. In a war where drones, cruise missiles, and long-range missiles appear constantly, losing an eye in the sky could significantly affect Ukraine's ability to respond. Notably, this information emerged around the same time that President Vladimir Putin made a tough statement about Russia's confrontation with the West. According to Kremlin statements cited by TASS and Reuters, Moscow continues to maintain that the West is using Ukraine as a tool to pressure Russia, while Russia is still setting very strict conditions for the negotiation process. On the ground, the situation in areas such as Sumy, Chasiv Yar, and other hotspots remains tense. According to battlefield reports from Russian and Ukrainian media, as well as conflict monitoring sources, several areas in eastern and northeastern Ukraine are still under heavy pressure from artillery, drones, and attacks targeting supply routes. Although battlefield information must always be cross-checked carefully, one thing is clear: the key fronts remain fiercely contested. Russia, according to reports from TASS, RIA Novosti, and Russian military sources, continues to claim intensified strikes on supply lines, defensive positions, and Ukrainian units trying to hold territory. In modern warfare, controlling a few buildings or several blocks does not necessarily mean controlling an entire city. What truly matters is the ability to maintain supply lines, sustain forces, and withstand artillery fire and drone attacks. Meanwhile, the Kremlin has also left open the possibility of dialogue, but only under conditions that Moscow says require fundamental preparation before any high-level meeting between President Putin and President Zelensky. According to TASS, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said Russia remains open to dialogue and welcomes the mediating role of the United States. But a leaders' meeting would only be meaningful if the parties were already close to formalizing a peace agreement. Another major point of attention is Russia's heavy intercontinental ballistic missile, the Sarmat. According to Reuters and Al Jazeera, President Vladimir Putin stated that Russia had successfully tested the Sarmat strategic missile and planned to put the system on combat duty in 2026. Moscow described Sarmat as one of the world's most powerful strategic weapons, capable of overcoming current and future missile defense systems. The message here is very clear: Russia wants to show that despite sanctions, military pressure, and diplomatic isolation, Moscow's nuclear deterrence capability is still being maintained and upgraded. In the context of the continuing Russia-West confrontation, every piece of information related to strategic missiles carries strong symbolic weight. It serves not only military purposes, but also political messaging directed at Washington, NATO, and potential adversaries. On the other side, the United States and Ukraine are reportedly moving closer to a new defense agreement related to drone technology. According to CBS News, Washington and Kyiv have drafted a memorandum intended to lay the foundation for a new defense agreement, which could open the door for Ukraine to export military technology to the United States and cooperate with American companies in UAV production. This is a significant turning point. For many years, Ukraine was primarily seen as a recipient of Western military assistance. But after years of war, Kyiv has developed a dynamic UAV ecosystem, from reconnaissance drones and strike drones to interceptors and anti-jamming technologies. If the United States wants to learn from or import part of this battlefield experience, it shows that Ukraine has moved from the position of aid recipient to that of a provider of modern warfare expertise. However, such an agreement would not be simple. Kyiv must protect the intellectual property rights of its domestic companies while ensuring that technology exports do not create shortages for the battlefield. Washington, meanwhile, must consider domestic political factors, defense budgets, and the ability to integrate Ukrainian technology into the US military system. In Europe, another noteworthy development is that NATO and Serbia have held their first joint military exercise. According to Al Jazeera and Channel News Asia, Serbia hosted its first joint drill with NATO, involving around 600 troops from Serbia and several NATO member states, including Italy, Romania, and Turkey. Serbia follows a policy of military neutrality and maintains relations with both Russia and NATO, making this development symbolically significant. The exercise was described as focusing on urban combat, base protection, crowd control, checkpoint operations, and defensive tactics. Although NATO emphasized that the activity respected Serbia's declared military neutrality, the Balkans remain a geopolitically sensitive region. Any shift in military cooperation there can trigger reactions from multiple sides. Leaving Europe, we now turn to the Middle East, where tensions involving Iran, the UAE, the United States, and the Strait of Hormuz are becoming a new global focal point. According to the Wall Street Journal, as cited by Reuters, the United Arab Emirates is said to have secretly carried out attacks against Iran, including one strike targeting a refinery on Lavan Island in the Persian Gulf in early April. Reuters noted that the UAE has not publicly acknowledged these activities and that Reuters could not independently verify all the details reported by the Wall Street Journal. For many years, Gulf states have often chosen a cautious approach: defense, diplomacy, mediation, and maintaining economic channels. But if the UAE has indeed shifted toward direct military action, even at a limited level, it would suggest that the patience of some Gulf states toward Iran may be wearing thin. Especially when energy infrastructure, ports, and strategic maritime routes are threatened, military responses may become an option on the table. Iran, on the other hand, is said to be increasingly naming the UAE directly in its wartime messaging. According to regional sources and Middle Eastern media, Iranian officials have issued multiple strong warnings toward countries that allow the United States or Israel to use their territory, bases, and military infrastructure for operations against Tehran. These warnings have made Iran-UAE relations even more tense and unpredictable. This is extremely dangerous, because the UAE is not only a strategically located Gulf state, it is also a major commercial, financial, maritime, and energy hub. If Iran-UAE tensions escalate, the consequences would not be limited to the military sphere. They could affect oil and gas shipping routes, supply chains, Dubai's financial markets, and Iran's commercial links with the outside world. In this broader picture, the United States continues to play a central role. According to reports from The Guardian, The Wall Street Journal, and US media, President Donald Trump has maintained a tough position that Iran must not be allowed to possess nuclear weapons, while also warning that Washington could resume military action if the ceasefire and negotiations collapse. This shows that Washington is placing the Iran nuclear issue above short-term economic calculations. However, this is also a double-edged sword. As gasoline prices rise and living costs increase, American voters may ask whether a hardline foreign policy is placing an additional burden on domestic life. With the midterm elections approaching, every decision related to Iran could become a heated political issue in Washington. Another noteworthy detail is that the United States is reportedly considering new options if conflict with Iran breaks out again. According to US media and defense sources mentioned in discussions about war powers, Washington may have to carefully calculate the legal framework, presidential authority, and deployment timelines under US law if anti-Iran operations are resumed. At the same time, Washington has also made the rare move of publicizing the location of an Ohio-class nuclear submarine near Gibraltar, close to Spain, according to an official announcement from the US Navy's 6th Fleet. A US ballistic missile submarine arrived in Gibraltar on May 10, 2026. The statement emphasized that the port visit demonstrated America's capability, flexibility, and commitment to NATO allies. This is an unusual move, because the locations of strategic nuclear submarines are normally kept strictly secret. At the Strait of Hormuz, tensions continue to expand into an international issue. According to Reuters, the US State Department said that Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi discussed the issue in a phone call in April and agreed that no country or organization should be allowed to impose fees on vessels passing through international waterways such as the Strait of Hormuz. The reason is easy to understand. China is one of the world's largest oil importers and has a vital interest in maintaining the flow of energy from the Gulf. The United States, meanwhile, wants to protect the principle of freedom of navigation and prevent Iran from using Hormuz as a strategic bargaining tool. Although the two powers compete fiercely on many fronts, both have reason to worry if a maritime route that carries around 1/5 of global oil and gas flows is turned into a toll point or becomes blocked. In this context, Iraq and Pakistan are said to have sought separate arrangements with Iran to ensure that oil and liquefied natural gas can pass through Hormuz. For Iraq, oil revenue is the lifeblood of the national budget. For Pakistan, imported energy from the Gulf is a key factor in keeping the economy running. This shows that when a strategic maritime route is threatened, countries will not simply wait for major powers to solve the problem. They will also seek direct negotiations to protect their immediate interests. South Korea has also been mentioned as possibly taking gradual steps to participate in efforts to secure maritime safety around Hormuz. According to South Korean media and regional diplomatic sources, Seoul is said to be considering forms of contribution such as political statements, personnel deployment, intelligence sharing, or military equipment support, but has not yet engaged in detailed discussions about expanding direct military involvement. This is a cautious approach, supporting its US ally while avoiding being pulled too deeply into a complex Middle Eastern conflict. Gulf tensions have also extended to Kuwait, where authorities said they intercepted a group suspected of links to Iranian forces attempting to enter Bubiyan Island. According to Reuters and Al Jazeera, Kuwait said it arrested 4 people accused of affiliation with Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as they tried to enter Kuwaiti territory by sea. Iran rejected the accusation, saying the individuals were conducting a routine maritime patrol and accidentally entered Kuwaiti waters due to a navigation system malfunction. Although the full truth still needs to be clarified, the incident shows that distrust in the Gulf is rising sharply. A small maritime incident, a fishing boat going off course, or a group of people suspected of infiltration could quickly become a diplomatic trigger. Pakistan has also rejected reports claiming that it allowed Iranian military aircraft to use its airbases to avoid possible attacks by the United States or Israel. According to regional and international reports, Islamabad stressed that Iranian and American aircraft appearing in Pakistan were only there to support diplomatic, security, and technical activities connected to de-escalation efforts. Pakistan's quick response shows that it wants to protect its role as a mediator while avoiding being seen as taking sides in the US-Iran crisis. In another development, the Taliban rejected Pakistan's accusation that a suicide attack in Pakistan had been planned from Afghan territory. According to South Asian regional sources, relations between Islamabad and Kabul have remained tense since the Taliban returned to power. The two sides frequently accuse each other of harboring armed groups that carry out cross-border attacks. This continues to leave South Asia facing the risk of prolonged instability, while terrorist attacks and border clashes show no sign of ending. Finally, we cannot ignore President Donald Trump's visit to China and his meeting with President Xi Jinping in Beijing. According to Reuters, The Wall Street Journal, and international media, the trip took place amid continuing US-China tensions over trade, Iran, Hormuz, and other geopolitical issues. The fact that the two leaders met at a symbolically important site such as the Temple of Heaven suggests that Beijing wanted to send a message about order, ceremony, and its ambition to shape China's role on the world stage. For President Trump, this trip could be an opportunity to discuss trade while also putting pressure on China over Iran. For President Xi, it is a chance to present China as a major power capable of dialogue with the United States, maintaining ties with Iran, and protecting its energy and maritime interests. Ladies and gentlemen, when we look at all the developments in today's program, we can see that the world is entering a highly unpredictable phase. In Europe, the Russia-Ukraine war is no longer only a battlefield confrontation, it has expanded into defense industry competition, sanctions, drone technology, and nuclear deterrence. In the Middle East, Iran, the United States, Israel, the UAE, Iraq, Pakistan, China, and South Korea are all being drawn into a strategic chessboard centered on the Strait of Hormuz, a maritime route that could determine global energy prices. The common thread running through all of today's stories is this: no crisis remains confined within its own borders anymore. A ship sinking in the Mediterranean could be linked to North Korea. An early warning aircraft threatened in Ukraine could affect NATO's strategy. A refinery strike in Iran could influence gasoline prices in the United States. Asia, and across the world. A decision made in Washington or Beijing could alter the flow of trade through Hormuz. And that is why Life and Current Affairs will continue to closely follow these developments, not only to report the news, but to help you understand what is truly happening behind the statements, the retaliatory moves, and the diplomatic meetings that may seem far away but can directly affect the world we live in. Thank you for watching today's program. If you find this content useful, please continue to follow Life and Current Affairs in our upcoming broadcasts, where we update, summarize, and analyze the most important global developments with a clear, coherent, and accessible perspective. Goodbye, and see you again in the next program.